and welcome to the latest episode of the Racing News 365 podcast, looking back at last weekend's eventful Spanish Grand Prix. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by 2023 Young Journalist of the Year, Sam, absolutely, Peace, Coop. We're adding another word every episode, it feels. And, of course, the main man himself, lead editor Ian Parks. Ian, I'll throw it to you first, because for those who watch this podcast on a regular basis, should probably know your normal background by now. A bit like last week, it's fair to say you're not currently at home.
Nope, not this weekend, obviously, because I've been in Barcelona, thankfully, to cover what was ultimately a quite riveting Spanish Grand Prix, in all fairness. No one-stop strategy in sight, thankfully. The Pirelli tyres did its job, safety car towards the end. We've got so much to talk about, haven't we? Can't think what. Gosh.
We have a lot. And Sam, for you, obviously, I'll give a little bit of an insight into what life's like working for Racing News 365. And that obviously we have somebody doing, let's say, an early shift. It's got to be said. So what happens is when it's a European race, they tend to not really get to cover any of the fallout. And it's fair to say there was quite a bit of fallout on this occasion. How did you feel not covering it?
You know those memes where you see like someone like standing like this is the SpongeBob and Patrick meme where they're like he's standing out inside. I think it's Squidward standing inside watching SpongeBob and Patrick having fun outside. That's how I felt after the race, watching all of you guys like dissecting all these amazing sound bites and quotes and this fascinating and developing story and situation. And I'm just sitting there going, I can do more if you need. Like I can pitch in. So yeah, it was kind of a bit like all my mates were having fun and I wasn't allowed to go out. Like I felt grounded. So yeah, but no, it was fascinating. And go on, Ian. So
I was just going to say we just got a fascinating insight into your life, mate, about SpongeBob SquarePants. So quite clearly.
I actually was never really a SpongeBob SquarePants, but I never really watched it because I didn't have the channels growing up. There's another fascinating insight into my life, I guess. But yeah,
we're learning everything this morning. Brilliant.
I've seen the memes.
And the fallout is still very much continuing. Pretty much everybody from the world of Formula One is giving their opinions. I hear Ralf Schumacher has now come out with some stuff, which you can find over at Racing
really?
News.
Ralf said something? Never.
Yeah,
I know, it's unbelievable.
Surprise.
He's usually so tight-lipped.
And even Dan Ticktum shared his views on an incident we will discuss actually a little bit later on, because a very fair response from him. But this would not be the Racing News 365 podcast without starting with a fun question. And of course, one of the big things which kind of went missing a little bit because of all the Max drama was that Nico Hulkenberg finished fifth in the Spanish Grand Prix. So my question to the two of you is, and I think Sam knows where this is going, prior to Spain on Sunday, when was the last time Nico Hulkenberg claimed a top 5 finish?
Ooh, top 5.
I reckon it was 2020 in one of his stand-in drives for Racing Point. I'm going to say Silverstone, one of the British Grand Prix, the 70th anniversary Grand Prix. Let's go.
So that would have been 2020.
2020.
Okay, Ian.
Good question. I reckon Sam's probably not too far out with that, in all honesty. I mean, probably can't,
because he finished 6th, I think, in Austria. He had back-to-back 6th place finishes last season in Silverstone and previously and prior to that in Austria. But I think you'd have to go back further for 5th.
Okay, so you're both going for roughly around the 70th anniversary race in 2020.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you're both wrong. It was the 2019 Italian Grand Prix where he finished 5th for Renault. So there you go. Fun fact. Well done, Nico. Your first top 5 in 6 years, basically? That's almost 6 years. That's been a long time, but that podium still eludes him. Maybe soon, who knows? But let's get straight into this, because there is so much to discuss, and we've got to kick things off with our biggest takeaways. And on this occasion, Ian's done first the last few weeks. Sam, you can go first this week.
I mean, my biggest takeaway is that Fernando still has it, score points. No, obviously I'm joking. I mean, where else do you go than the
Oh,
obvious
I thought
talking
you were
point?
going to continue with
I
that.
thought
That
it
would
was
have been
serious
such
for
a
a
good one.
second.
I mean, it was a nice narrative, right? Scoring his first points of the season at home, but no, like, I mean, the fact that even 10 minutes after the race, I was like, oh wait, Nico finished fifth, because in all the kind of chaos, you sometimes lose exactly what's going on with the results and the order, until you kind of have a second to look back and go, right, okay, this is how it all kind of unfolded after it got mental. I mean, the biggest talking point is, it's obvious that it just, and we'll get more into it, but it's the Max Verstappen reaction, how he responded. And I'm not talking about the incident as in such, but like just the complete kind of apoplexy of his interactions with GP Lambiase. He just it was kind of almost total head loss for him in that moment, which is then what kind of precipitated what came after potentially. So that's the biggest take home, is that he just totally saw red.
Yeah, I mean, mine's a little bit different actually, in that I think it's fair to say, despite the fact we saw some 2-stop strategy, some 3-stop, the race itself wasn't the most eventful. At least that's how it was looking. But I think
It was a strategy race.
It gave us a clear reminder how one instant, in this case, obviously Kimi Antonelli having what seems to be a power unit failure, can just still flip everything on its head, and it almost gives that reminder that the race is not done until it's done. We'd all kind of assumed that Oscar had won after the first few laps, but Kimi obviously gave us, I mean, his back-to-back, poor 3 bad weekends in a row for him now, but it's given us that reminder that the race isn't finished until it is. And obviously, I mean, for Max, it was looking set to be a podium. Who would have predicted when the safety car came out, he would have ended up in 10th? So that's my biggest takeaway. Ian, for you, what was your biggest take home?
Taking a step away from all the Max incident stuff, just to look at something a little bit different. It was the complete contrast in Lewis Hamilton's personality, demeanor, character within the space of 24 hours. And just wondering now where he goes from here. He himself was left wondering that when he stepped away from the pen post-race on Sunday night. Post-qualifying on Saturday, he was a happy chap. You could tell he'd qualified 5th, 2 places ahead of Charles Leclerc. Only the second time this season in a Grand Prix qualifying that Lewis had managed to out-qualify Charles, and it was the first time since the second race in China. So he'd gone 8 races since then in being out-qualified by his teammate. So, and he was looking comfortable. He's talking about the fact he felt comfortable, felt good in the car. I think it was about a quarter of a second behind second on the grid, Lando Norris. So, real tick in the box, because as we know, where Lewis has struggled more often than not, and most recently, not just with Ferrari, but obviously previously with Mercedes, has been in qualifying. And then he's come good with race pace on a Sunday. So the natural assumption was Lewis qualifying well on Saturday, given the good race pace with Lewis allied to the car, maybe he's got a chance of that podium. He himself had mentioned about potentially claiming a podium position. And yet, absolutely nowhere, literally nowhere on pace on Sunday. And he was just bereft of any ideas, thoughts, wondering where to go. And in all honesty, he could not wait to escape the written media pen, well, just the media pen in general, because he'd actually done all his round of TV interviews, and then he came to us. And I actually looked at him, and he'd been trying to answer these questions, didn't want to answer, didn't want to be there. And I said to him, "You want to leave, don't you?" And he just went, "Yeah." And I said, "Okay, off you go then." And that was it. That was literally, I think, less than 2 minutes that we had in the written media pen with Lewis. So it's just a case of, which is not normally the way. And it's just a case of, what does he do now? Where does he go from here in the build-up to Canada? How is he going to get out of this between him and his team to turn things around, to get on top of this car, to ensure not only can he qualify well, but also that it has good race pace. He's got to have both. And we saw with Charles, he sacrificed a degree of qualifying to ensure he had good race pace, which is why he managed to get on the podium in the end and not Lewis.
We will discuss Lewis a bit more later on. I'm actually going to change the plan now. I was going to be doing our reflections and our predictions from Barcelona. However, we'll do that at the end now. We've got some breaking news on the Racing News 365 podcast, and that Max Verstappen has taken to social media addressing what happened on Sunday. So a bit of a live reaction. I'll quickly read out what he's put on social media. This has come from Max on Instagram, for those wondering. We had an exciting strategy and good race in Barcelona till the safety car came out. Our tyre choice to the end and some moves after the safety car restarted fueled my frustration, leading to a move that was not right and shouldn't have happened. I always give everything out there for the team and emotions can run high. You win some together, you lose some together. See you in Montreal. Ian, I'll come to you straight away on that. This is a bit of an F1 update now. Your live reactions, of course, to that. He's taken notice that what he did was wrong.
Effectively, he's held his hands up because his responses, not only in the written media pen, and if anybody's seen the interview he did with Rachel Brooks for Sky Sports in the TV pen, that was awful. The way he treated Rachel was just totally unbecoming, totally uncalled for. And then he got to us pretty much immediately after, and it's fair to say that he was a little bit more forthcoming with some of his responses. Nevertheless, when asked directly, and I'm going to hold my hand up and say it was me that asked him directly as to whether he deliberately did go into George, he just turned around and said it was a misjudgment, quote unquote. So at least now, on reflection, and when we spoke to Christian Horner, probably about 30 minutes, 40 minutes after Max, Christian actually had not had the opportunity to speak with Max yet, given Max's round of interviews, and the fact that Max had also then, pretty much coming out of those interviews, had to go to the steward's room to discuss his incident with Charles Leclerc. So I'm wondering now, and Christian did say that they would look at it internally, was his singular response to it, because he couldn't really say what had happened with Max until he discussed it with Max quite clearly. It's now been reviewed internally, and it looks like they've urged Max to do something about it. He's done something about it. He's taken to social media. He's held his hands up, and let's give him a degree of credit for that. Fair play.
Yeah, completely. And obviously, it's interesting as well because so many big quotes came out from that incident with George on turn 5. We'll discuss all three in a second. But obviously, the big line really came from Nico Rosberg, of course, the 2016 world champion, who was on commentary duties for Sky Sports F1 in the UK. And as soon as it happened, called for Max to be black flagged, which essentially would be shown to a driver to disqualify them from the race. A very powerful line. And we obviously ran a poll at Racing News 365 asking our viewers if they agreed with Nico, should Max have been disqualified? And it's fair to say went fairly viral because 12,500 people voted that yes, he should have been disqualified. 4,500 said that no, he should not have been disqualified. I mean, Sam, what are your views on that? And of course, your live reaction as well to Max's statement on Instagram.
I mean, well, first of all, the statement on Instagram it's also quite interestingly worded. It's cleverly and carefully worded because he doesn't explicitly say what his motivation was, which is still kind of, we don't know whether or not it was a case of, I'm going to put the car there and let George decide because he was aiming for the corner because we don't know what he was thinking, or if it was I'm hoping that we meet at the corner. And I can I'm making a point from that. So he kind of said, I made a move that I shouldn't have, and it, shouldn't have happened. But again, that doesn't kind of cover the intention behind it. And only he will know for certain if it was deliberate, the actual contact itself. The thing for Max is that he's so good at controlling the car, as we saw from that snap of oversteer. At the start of the safety car restart, that he can't kind of use that as a defense in these scenarios. He can't use it. Oh, sorry, I lost control of the car, or it was or whatever. So yeah, it's a very difficult thing for him to acquiesce with, and what we're seeing here with this Instagram post is him acquiesce with that. But I do think a disqualification would have been fair. It was his David Beckham moment in many ways. He reacted in a way that he shouldn't have. David Beckham against Argentina in the World Cup in 1998, he got sent off for that. A sending off is equivalent to a disqualification. I think that's probably fair. Obviously different sports, but like it was that kind of, he just in the moment just totally lost his reasoning. And what I am relieved to see, though, is that he has now taken accountability for that, because my thoughts coming into this podcast was it's on a weekend where you have an F2 driver in Alex Dunn who's come out and said, look, sometimes I just need to rein it in. I've made a couple of mistakes in the last couple of weeks and that's on me. And he held that accountability, a teenager. And so for Max to say kind of, why does it matter if it was intentional or not? That was alarming and concerning. So he has, I think, made amends for that in many ways now. But it's just, it is one of those things that I think always kind of leaves a question mark over Max's legacy. And he's not the first driver. Michael Schumacher had a few moments in his career when you go, but it's the kind of thing where there's always that asterisk, that caveat of, he's brilliant, but like with the brilliance comes these moments of madness, it seems.
I think that's an argument for all the big drivers, for all the greats, though. You look at all of them, and actually, it's not even just in F1. Nico Rosberg used actually a MotoGP comparison. And I think across any form of motorsport, I think any multi-world champion seems to have a little asterisk next to them for some instant. But let's very quickly go through the three incidents and give our verdicts. Obviously, it wasn't just the Max and George Russell at turn 5 which happened. So obviously, we'll start off with the first one on lap 61 at the safety car restart, which was, of course, Max and Charles Leclerc making contact down the start, finish straight. No further action was taken. Sam, do you agree with that?
I do. I think neither of them was wholly responsible. I think Charles misjudged it slightly, but I'm not sure it was a big enough misjudgment to say, no, you're totally in the wrong here, because it was almost this kind of convergence. If I had to apportion blame one way or the other, I'd say it was Charles. But I think I think it's fair to say that it was a racing incident. But I also think that it was a good idea for the stewards to bring them, in front of them to say, look, let's have a chat about this, because that could have been really bad. At a safety car restart on a straight, you could have collected the entire field, basically.
Interesting. Ian, do you agree, Sam? Do you think it was correct that the Max Leclerc incident was no further action?
People, first of all, before I answer that, Nick, people will probably notice a slight change of background. Not for the first time when I'm overseas and I'm trying to do one of these podcasts. I've got internet and data issues, so I've switched from my hotel room. I'm now in hotel reception, so hopefully the background noise will be minimal. Do I agree with no further action? I looked at it a few times, and I've looked at it since, and I'm surprised that Charles didn't get a penalty. I thought, in all honesty, that he came across on Max. I can kind of understand the steward's thinking as well a little bit. Obviously, Max did have that awful squirrely moment, and I mentioned on the update post-race that I thought how he caught that car was just miraculous in itself, because it could have been far, far worse. Somehow he managed to straighten it up. But obviously that then naturally led to Charles getting this run on him down the start-finish straight. And as they came alongside one another, I did think that Charles came across a little bit more into Max than the other way around. So I honestly thought that Charles was going to get a penalty for that. And I thought Nico Hulkenberg was going to get promoted to fourth on the back of it. So that was my initial thinking. So on the back of that, I therefore was actually surprised when I read the steward's document and they decided that it was that neither driver, to again use their phrase, neither driver was predominantly or wholly to blame. And I apologise for the background noise because
Interesting.
that's probably not great.
All good. Interesting. I agree with you, Ian. In all fairness, I have a feeling that Leclerc actually probably should have got a penalty, because what's interesting as well is he kind of joked about it, I think, without realizing what he was saying after the race. So I agree with you. I think maybe a 5-second time penalty probably would have been fair. Obviously, the second incident is, of course, then a few seconds later at turn 1 between Max and George. Of course, George, in the FIA document, was said to have basically lost control of his car, made contact with Max. Max had no choice but to take to the inner escape road, rejoined ahead, and of course, no further action was taken. That decision, though, was made, obviously, after the turn 5 incident post-race, and Red Bull obviously asked Max to let George pass, kind of concerned that Max was going to be given a penalty like he was in Saudi Arabia with Oscar for not giving the position back. I'll be honest, even on that one, I think George probably deserved a 5-second time penalty, because ultimately he's gone into the corner, a late dive bomb, made contact with Max. Max has had no choice but to take to the escape road. And I think with, like, the Leclerc incident, I think the one between Max and Leclerc was actually Leclerc's fault, and he should have got a 5-second time penalty. I think the one with Max and George, the first one, should have been a 5-second time penalty. Sam, do you agree on that? Or do you think it was like the steward said, no further action needed?
I think it was no further action needed, but only because in this case, Max ended up ahead, and it was like no harm, no foul from the initial incident. Obviously, as we know, there was a long end to that tail. But yeah, I think had Max suffered damage or anything like that, I think the steward would have taken a different route, and I would have agreed with that. I think I agree with no further action, because essentially the penalty there on George's part is that Max stayed ahead and that he didn't get the position immediately. George was out of control, but it was really only because he was in the wake of Charles's car, kind of mid-apex. There was, extenuating circumstances almost in that sense. But also, I mean, one thing that we've seen a lot of online is people kind of calling this like almost this catastrophic error on Red Bull's part. Like, it was a mistake, don't get me wrong, to ask Max to give the position back, but I can completely 100% understand why they have done that in that moment. Because you look at that, and before you've fully analysed it, really delved into the details of that incident with George and Max at turn 1, it does look like Max has kind of gone off and gained an advantage, because George ultimately does still make the corner. So I think the suggestion that Red Bull have made this egregious kind of mistake is overblown, and I think it's totally justified in their thinking based on previous decisions that have been made on similar instances to say, look, we're not going to risk it, because a 5-second time penalty or 10-second time penalty is going to be far more damaging to your race than merely giving the position to George.
Ian, your thoughts?
It's only a mistake with 2020 hindsight.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it is, isn't it? At the time, it didn't look like a mistake. It looked like they were playing fair. They'd got what happened in Jeddah in their minds, whereby they didn't order Max to give the place back to Lando. Max got a 10-second time penalty for that. So quite clearly, fearing a repeat of that incident and bearing in mind any 10-second time penalties so late in the race would most certainly have pitched Max right at the back of the point scoring positions, if not maybe just out of them. I don't know. Who knows? But nevertheless, it was a call at the time made with all the information they had to hand and bearing in mind what had gone on in Jeddah. So I can quite clearly understand why Red Bull made that call when they did. And as I say, yes, we can all look back now and play the hindsight card and say, yeah, it was a mistake. But at the time, it wasn't. They were just doing what they thought was the right thing in fear of a potential penalty.
Yeah.
Okay, one more penalty. Go on.
When I say it was a mistake, I mean it very much in Ian's context of looking back at it now, we can see it was a mistake. I didn't in the moment go, oh, that's a massive error they're making there. Don't do that. I was like, well, obviously they need to give the position back. But I also do think that part of the problem for Red Bull in that moment is that they are so full-throated in their defense of Max so often. And it's almost like they've created this situation where when they say, look, we're instructing you to do this, he got to the point where it was, GP Lambias was saying, this is our recommendation to you. you almost need the team to be able to say, no, Max, we're telling you to do it and do it. And I think that's kind of part of the wider picture that's maybe then led to what then ultimately happened with George at turn 5.
Right, very quickly, because there is still obviously one more incident to discuss, and then we've got a lot more still to go through, but time is of the essence. We've discussed the 2 incidents and our verdicts. The final one, of course, turn 5, a 10-second time penalty and 3 penalty points were awarded. Sam, fair or not fair?
The 3 penalty points are fair. I think it could have been more than 10 seconds. It could have been a drive-through. It could have been a 10-second stop-go. And also, like many of our fans, in fact, 3/4 of the fans who have voted on our poll, I think also a disqualification would be fair. I don't know if I land on any one with any kind of certainty, but I do think that probably more than 10 seconds, I would have given more than 10 seconds myself.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. Ian, your thoughts?
I think I made my point pretty clear in the update on Sunday evening that I do not understand why the stewards reacted so swiftly to that one. I've read a good number of the comments under the update, and a few fans have pointed out, well, the way the stewards looked at that one, it was quite clearly a clear case for them of intent and causing a collision. And naturally, when you have those moments of causing a collision, the stewards sometimes react really swiftly. However, given the way Max moved into George, I think this was one of those where they should have summoned Max in front of them and asked him for an explanation. And hopefully he would have given a better explanation to them at that time than he did to Rachel Brooks on Sky Sports F1 and to us as written media in the pen afterwards. And maybe now we wouldn't be discussing this too much like we are, and we wouldn't be discussing the Max apology, or even though he's not actually apologized, he's gone as far as he possibly can.
Good point.
In fairness to Max, he's never, but he's not actually said, yeah, I'm really sorry for that, I shouldn't have done it. This is Max's own wording. For me, that should have gone in front of the stewards. Clear as day. If they're going to call Max and Charlotte in front of them for that incident, then they should have called up Max and George for that extra incident as well. In particular, as we have discovered that they didn't have Max on board, because that for me would have been key. Because if you've got Max on board and you can see those steering adjustments, then there's absolute intent and malice aforethought going into that maneuver. So I don't think you're right, guys. I think it should have been more than 10 seconds. I think the 3 penalty points, absolutely, because that has now really left him on the cusp of this one race ban. One more point, he's done. He's got to get through Canada and Austria cleanly before any points have come off his license for the 12-month period. But it's going to be fascinating watch over Canada and Austria, that's for sure.
Right, let's move on, because that is about 30 minutes discussing Max. And obviously, we've also got a fan questions video to do where we'll discuss, obviously, George Russell and stuff a lot more. Let's talk about the race winner, Oscar Piastri, because the big question kind of going into Spain from Monaco was, how would Oscar react to, well, losing to Lando and Monaco? And it's fair to say, Sam, Monaco quite clearly has not phased Oscar. He's increased his lead to 10 points in the championship. And I mean, it was near enough the perfect weekend in Barcelona for him.
It's not the initial setbacks that kind of define a season or an athlete. It is how they respond to them. As cliche as that is, Oscar has proven this weekend that he has that ability. And it was fairly emphatic at points. And even during the race, when Lando started to close up and you go, oh, okay, we might have a race here, because Lando often has superior race pace and blah, 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 so on and so forth. And he would get to about, kind of in the 2-second, 3-second region. And then Oscar would just put his foot down. And he was almost like, he was toying with him a little bit. And he was it was a statement, essentially, that, look, you can close in and I'll let you do that. But don't for a second think that I do not completely have this race in control and in hand. And he did. He didn't look, as soon as the lights went out, he reacted quicker. Lando himself said that he was kind of taken aback, taken off guard by how quickly the lights went out. Oscar didn't. It didn't catch all of them off guard. And from that point onwards, yeah, I mean, it was a brilliant drive, and how he managed that run down to the first corner was perfect, because there's so much jeopardy heading down to turn one in Spain because it's such a long run down to that corner. We often see two, 3 cars side by side, and Oscar was just like, absolutely not. That is not happening today. And from there, it was kind of an inevitability that he was going to win. And fair play to him. A late safety car, it could have been nervy, but even then, he didn't look in any danger whatsoever of losing.
You kind of touched on there something that I'm going to ask Ian about, because as you mentioned, Sam, Lando was slow to react into the lights. Oscar made a lightning start. Lando didn't. And actually, we've seen Lando make these mistakes at the start before, something he's even addressed himself. And ultimately, Ian, this is what, really cost Lando in particular down to the run in turn one. You can argue for the race win overall, is that it was, at the end of the day, another mistake from Lando.
This is what's going to determine the outcome of this year's world title between Oscar and Lando. How many mistakes Lando Norris makes over the course of the season and how costly they're going to be. We've already seen so far he's made mistakes. They have been costly. This was another weekend. He made a mistake in qualifying, which is why he finished the distance that he did to Oscar at the end of Q3, when he'd actually got the edge on him after the first run in Q3. Yeah. Although he did make that cheeky, quote unquote, to coin Oscar's word, move by getting a little bit of a DRS toe, or certainly a little bit of a toe anyway, at the end of that Q3 lap, that first run in Q3. And then he admitted himself after qualifying that he'd made mistakes on his second run. And then, okay, he'd still got that front row position, still in a really good position to potentially do something going into turn one. Instead, he was slow away. And as I say, these little errors are stacking up again this season, and they will prove defining for Lando Norris as to whether he will be world champion or whether Oscar Piastri will be world champion. Because without a shadow of a doubt, these two guys are neck and neck for the most part in terms of qualifying pace and race pace. It's just about who has the cleanest weekend going forward across the remaining 15. We've still got another 15 weekends to go, guys, just to point out. So, still not rolling Max out.
No.
Still not going to count him out at this stage.
Never.
He's dropped 49 points behind, which is 2 race victories worth of points. That's a lot. It is a lot. But as I say, you can't count him out. So at this point, for me, he's still in the mix. But as far as the McLaren guys are concerned, yeah, it's all about who can have the cleanest weekend, or in particular on any given Sunday.
Just quickly, Ian, on something you just mentioned there, the fact that Max is now obviously 49 points behind Oscar. More interestingly, George Russell is now only 26 points behind Max. And of course, Racing News 365 understands, following our colleague Aaron Deckers, that if Max is not in the top 3 of the drivers' standings come the summer at some point, then he can activate a clause to leave Red Bull at the end of this season for 2026. That's going to be actually, in many ways, yes, you've got the battle for the title itself, but that, let's say, feud or fight now between George and Max is going to be really interesting to watch, given what this apparent clause is.
Could you imagine?
Does Sam want this?
Oh, sorry.
Sam's going to start first. Go, Sam.
Yeah,
go.
Sorry. But just quickly, could you imagine if by letting George ahead of him almost, de facto, whether intentional or not, it basically starts off a course of actions that leads to Max replacing George at Mercedes. It would be just sensational to see that kind of development happen, and it would add yet another ingredient to this kind of ensuing and budding rivalry between the two.
Ian?
Or Aston Martin.
Aston Martin.
There were certain things that come out over the course of that weekend in the wake of what happened with Lance Stroll. Certain rumours, certain speculation. Lance's injury that occurred on his right wrist, seemingly a hangover, a very long distance hangover, it has to be said, following the bike accident that he had pre-2023, when he broke both his wrists, nevertheless 6 days later was competing quite heroically and bravely. It's one of the greatest things that Lance Stroll has done throughout his Formula One career in the Bahrain Grand Prix. And yet here we are 2.5 years later. We were told that the pain had been getting steadily worse over the past few weeks. And then all of a sudden the pain grew to such an extent after getting out of the car in qualifying that it forced him to withdraw from the Grand Prix on medical advice. I've heard that certain people inside Aston Martin, this was the first they knew about this growing reoccurrence of pain inside Lance's right wrist. And I've also heard speculation and rumor that this is the first step towards a glide path of Lance leaving Formula One at the end of the season. That it is going to be the excuse that could possibly be used for him to part ways. And rather than just saying, axing him at the end of the season, bearing in mind he does have one more year on his contract. He's not had the rolling that he has had in the past. They actually signed him on this occasion up to a 2-year deal for this season and next. But on this occasion, the suggestion is the penny is now finally starting to drop. And if Aston Martin does want to be a serious title contender for both, not just the drivers, but the constructors, primarily for them as a serious manufacturer, then it needs somebody else in that car alongside Fernando Alonso, and what better driver to have in that second car alongside Fernando Alonso than Max Verstappen.
Bombshell. I mean, I don't quite know what other word to use in that. That's definitely a fascinating development to keep an eye on, especially obviously with the next race being Lance's home race in Canada. Will he be fit? Will he not be? Only time will tell. Just the final talking point very quickly before we do our predictions. And I want to come to you on this one as well, Ian, because obviously throughout your career, the driver you've probably covered the most is Lewis Hamilton, of course. You know, you've been around in the paddock for pretty much the entirety of his career. And a big talking point that's come out from Barcelona, and in particular how Lewis came across in the media pen. And as you said yourself in the F1 update, you know, you've not really seen him so downbeat this whole year or for a long time, in fact. Is this Lewis now? He said himself that this is almost a development year, a year to get settled into Ferrari before 2026. The fact that he's kind of been beaten so comfortably by Charles Leclerc, is this Lewis now just frustrated with what's going on? Or do you think this is something bigger? Is he maybe starting to realise that he hasn't got what he used to have? Or is it actually just the car?
There could be elements of both. I mean, I think it was Nico again over the weekend, wasn't it, who pointed out Lewis's age is 40, as we know. And, you know, time eventually catches up with the greatest. We know Lewis has had these qualifying struggles. We've primarily put it down to the car and the fact that this generation of car in particular, he has noticeably struggled with. We know Mercedes did not build a great car under these regulations, or have not built a great car at any stage under these regulations. It's had its moments, their cars, over these past 3.5 years so far, but it's not been good enough to be consistently challenging for high grid slots, podiums, in particular, Grand Prix victories, and especially the titles. And you then start to, when you've got that, and you've got Lewis throughout that period, these 3.5 years, going now into his 40s, you add the two together and you build this picture, and you start to then question Lewis's ability and his performance, as well as the performance of the car. As mentioned, this was always, and I said this from the very beginning, from my perspective, this was always going to be that developmental year for Lewis at Ferrari, to get used to a brand new team, to get used to its processes, to understand how the people operate, to get used to a brand new race engineer and Riccardo Adami, bearing in mind all those years that he had with Bono at Mercedes and the relationship that they built up. But even then, in the very beginning, it wasn't smooth sailing. So for me, this season was Lewis getting used to all of that, finally getting rid of this regulation set, putting it behind him, going into next year, fully understanding Ferrari and appreciative of all those things I've just mentioned. And then, will he have the car? That's going to be the key thing now. What kind of car is Ferrari going to construct for the 2026 season? Bearing in mind, it's a different set of regulations. Will it be tailor-made to the way Lewis likes it, which is sharp at the front, stable at the rear? So for me, yeah, he came out of this weekend super down. Never seen him like it for a long period of time. Not even through the Mercedes dark days did I see him look like that on Sunday post-race in Spain. So I'm sure he'll come bouncing back in Canada. He'll be different character again. He'll have recovered. He'll have had his talks. He'll have been in the simulator and all of that. And then we'll clean slate going into Canada.
Sam, very quickly, your closing thoughts on that before we look back at our predictions.
Yeah, I agree. It was fascinating when he was talking to Sky. The final question was kind of, do you think Ferrari will be able to fix this, in the car? And he goes, probably not. And then he says something to the effect of, it's probably just me. And it's that, and we've seen that a little bit from Lewis in the past, but I agree with him. I don't think to quite that extent of almost, this is it. This is what you get now, and I do not have what it takes to compete to the level that my teammate can, which is obviously your first and most immediate benchmark. And and in the race, it wasn't like it as it unfolded, he kind of couldn't keep the tyres alive. He was immediately slower than Charles. Within a handful of laps, you had Charles on his rear going, look, I'm quicker, I've got a better strategy, it's time for him to move aside. And Charles was absolutely right. Ferrari ultimately did the right thing. You can again argue, did they leave it a bit too late, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I think that I agree with Ian that it is a development year, and it is a kind of a year in which the two parties, Ferrari and Hamilton, will gel. But how's that relationship, and how is Lewis going to be by the time they get to 2026? Like, how damaging long term will this painful period that they're going through be? But then in 12 months' time, we could be sitting here with Lewis, kind of 50 points ahead in the championship, going, well, look at that, we were wrong. So you just don't know with F1, and especially when you're going into a new regulations era.
And of course, you just don't know. You just do not know. And of course, the fans who've been watching this podcast on YouTube, let us know your thoughts on anything we've discussed in the comment section below. But this podcast cannot conclude until we have looked back and reflected very quickly on our Spanish Grand Prix predictions. And I'll be honest, guys, it was a low-scoring predictions weekend from all of us, including the fan Gerard. So very quickly, nobody correctly got who would finish in 10th. Nobody correctly got who would set the fastest pit stop.
Ian is furious with Fernando Alonso.
Ian's furious and doesn't realise he's on mute.
He does, yeah, he's on mute. Maybe it's a good thing he's on mute.
He's still on mute. This is a live reaction, guys. Ian's currently ranting, but doesn't realise he's actually on mute.
Ranting and raving.
He's ranting and raving. Maybe he's on mute on purpose, possibly. That could be what he's doing. I'm not sure.
I've just noticed I put the mic because I'm trying to silence the background here.
It was brilliant.
Just going to go.
That's staying in.
You were just absolutely losing it. All silent.
No. It looked like
it, but
on
YouTube.
I was because Fernando would have got 10th, wouldn't he? But for the max penalty.
But for Max, it would have been. It would have been.
I was going to thank Max for ruining my predictions, but that is. Oh yeah, of course.
It's a very good point. Anyway, so nobody got 10th correct, and nobody got the fastest pit stop correct because for the second time this season, Steak Sauber completed the fastest pit stop. So well done, Steak. Round of applause. Sam and I both got fastest lap correct. That went to Oscar Piastri, so we both got 3 points for that. Ian, you correctly said Lando in second, but other than that, there was just a couple of points here and there for getting people in the top 3 the wrong way around. So Gerard, unfortunately, only got 2 points for the fans for getting Lando and Oscar in the wrong order. Unlucky Gerard, unlucky fans. Sam, you picked up 4 points for the Piastri, 3 points for fastest lap, and for saying Norris would win. He finished second. Ian, you picked up 3 points, only for saying that Lando would finish second. That's it, unfortunately, mate. I picked up 5 points because I said Oscar fastest lap, but I also got Lando and Oscar in the wrong position, which means in the Racing News 365 Predictors Championship, Sam, you're still in last, my friend, on 44 points. The fans are in third on 46, and the joint leaders are myself and Ian on 53. At least we've now got a bit of time to think about Canada. So, anyways, this has been the latest episode of the Racing News 365 podcast. Ian, safe travels home. From Sam, Ian, and I, we will see you next week for the next episode of the podcast. See you later.
As always, take care, folks. Thanks for watching and listening.
Thanks for joining us.